Hi, I'm Peter Richards. I am a Director of Transportation Engineering at IBI Group. I'm the Product Director for CurbIQ, which is an IBI curbside management product. And I'm joined here by Trevor McIntyre. Trevor?
Hi, I'm Trevor McIntyre. I'm a partner of Peter's. I'm also a director at IBI, and I'm responsible for our global placemaking practice. And as part of that, I'm involved in the CaféTO program, which we are running for the City of Toronto.
Yes, I see your lovely, perhaps real, perhaps virtual background. So I wanted to ask you about CaféTO. So tell me about the CaféTO program and why it's so important to cities like Toronto.
Last summer, we started in July, and on July 1st was the official opening, and ran the program until around November the 15th. And then closed the program down for the winter. We're lucky enough to reopen it again this year for what we call CaféTO 2.0.
That's very exciting. How many restaurants have signed up approximately in 2020 and now in 2021?
In 2020, at the end of the year, in terms of the business improvement areas that help organize the restaurants, we had about 60 BIAs that were involved in the program, and that resulted in about 1,000 restaurants that opened during that time. This year, we are up to probably about 70 BIAs. We've got some new ones that are participating in the program for the first time this year, and we're currently at about 500 restaurants that are marked and ready to open when the notice is given. We anticipate about 850 right now, and by the time the third wave comes through, will be in excess of 1,000. I would speculate. And so this year, there's equal amount of excitement. There's probably 75% of the restaurants that were involved last year have returned and are still involved in it. Probably another 25% are either new or restaurants that may have changed hands, or restaurants that weren't part of the program that have joined part of the program this year.
That is an incredible pace and sheer number of restaurants in such a short period of time. You obviously, Trevor, have a long history of urban design. What have you learned about complete streets and the curbside through this CaféTO process?
I think it's been a long time coming, and I think what we realized more than anything is when you're out there and meeting with BIAs and explaining to them the process, what you actually realize is that curb lane plays a bunch of different functions. It's cars, it's parking, it's curbside pickup and drop off. During the pandemic, it's been people waiting in line to enter a store, little parklets that have been installed for kids to grab an ice cream and sit in those parklets. And so the number of activities have actually changed. What you do realize is how many different programs are assigned to that curbside lane right now.
Interesting points. And I think that's one thing I've learned and continue to learn over the last couple of years is that cities have appetite for change. You don't, over your shoulder, there's 3 people sitting on a patio, and that would normally be 1 vehicle parked for 3 hours, essentially long-term vehicle storage, when there are better and higher uses based on different competing needs and street types on these complete streets that can be better served by having people park off-street or do their activities off-street and really prioritize the use of other modes at the curb.
Yeah,
so that's great. One interesting thing I learned, not just from CaféTO, but a lot of the changes that have been happening at the curbside, the implementation of slow or quiet streets and new bike lanes across the world, is that when cities try to understand the loss of parking and how many parking spaces are lost, they don't have this information anywhere digitally that they can pull up. And that's part of the reason that we invented CurbIQ, to help cities digitize this data and quickly and visually understand and count up this information without having to go to the field all of the time. The access is at your fingertips on your mobile device or desktop device. And I obviously my team at CurbIQ team and the new urban design team work together on this year's version of CaféTO. Tell us about how CurbIQ and the digital information helped you and your team.
Yeah. Yeah, this is very interesting because this year, one of the things we did slightly differently at the start of the year is we said that we as an IBI staff would actually take more ownership in terms of the sites, the BIAs, the markings of the sites, and et cetera. Whereas I think we had a bigger team from the city last year who we coordinated with on that. But the challenge was, of course, we had a stay-at-home order, and we were limited to the number of site visits that we could make. So we worked with the city to determine like how to minimize the number of site visits. And for things that were clear, we just relied on CurbIQ, for instance. We sometimes rely on Google Street View, and it helps. We also know of the restaurants that we had last year, we know roughly where things are. But often what happens is on Street View, you may not have a clear view of things like speed limits. And so you have to assume certain speed limits at different times, which means we have different merge lanes for protecting the people on the cafe. We have parking bylaws, obviously. We have hydrants in some cases. We have loading zones that we have to respect. And all of those things actually factor in. And so CurbIQ was really useful for us this year because we could actually go online quickly, understand the regulatory requirements, transfer those onto the drawings, and then set up our safety regime based on that. It's fantastic, and I think it'll only help in the efficiency of the city as we move forward. I think it's an amazing tool, and when you and the team developed it, you weren't thinking about a pandemic, but that just describes something about resiliency of a good tool, that it should be able to be adapted for other uses.
Yes, it was great to understand the process and what was previously done in terms of exhaustive and extensive site visits, trying to use signage sets or zooming in on Google Street View versus having all the information visually in CurbIQ and measuring those distances, seeing the fire hydrants and transit stops and patio locations themselves. So very powerful information to have digitally.
And that's a good point. I think people's activity levels have changed as well. I think, everyone, doesn't have a place to drive to. They're spending less time in their cars, so there's less congestion. But you see through your neighborhoods, you see the number of people out walking and taking breaks in their day and going for walks, and that is really, really critical because it's mental health, it's physical health. But if they are actually getting out and getting to know their neighborhoods and starting to buy locally, that's a huge difference in the way our economy works.
You've done urban design for decades, and in the past couple of years, there's been some incredible redesign at an unparalleled change of pace and acceptance. What do you think this means for the future of the curbside and complete streets?
I think it's a really positive thing, and the question that I think through the year last year was asked more and more, and we were asked to do some CBC radio interviews and whatnot. And the question that always came up was really, it's about time. Like in Europe, they do this everywhere. How come we are just figuring this out for the first time? And I think, we have to keep in mind that we have a very different regulatory environment. And we've always, our roads have always been monitored by based on traffic and traffic volumes and how many vehicles are moving and peak times and those kind of measures. And I think there is an acceptance now to more of a shared environment. And whether it's shared because we've all got used to Uber and we've got used to Lyft and all the shared economy that's around us, that there's more of an acceptance to that curb lane can be programmed to act differently in the morning or in the evening or on a Sunday or a Saturday, and how can it function differently? And I think the city was so responsive in this because this was not a tactical urbanism move. This was about keeping businesses alive, and a multi-billion-dollar industry that was closing at a rate at just an incredible rate last year. So it was, how do you actually keep it industry? How do you keep it alive to expand their space? And it means you always have to give up something to get something in return. And the fact that the city and the public said, you know what, I'm not driving as much. I don't really need those lanes. There's another benefit to it, I think, has been an eye-opener for the public in general, and certainly for the restaurant industry. And I just hope that, you know, we learn from it and we realize that we can act differently. And so from that standpoint, I guess it is tactical urbanism, but it's actually coming from the administration and from a forward-thinking mayor in this case as well.
Thank you, Trevor, for taking the time today to explain the CaféTO program and how digital tools like CurbIQ helped